Important to note, as a 501c3, the JCRC does not support or oppose any candidate for public office. However, these meetings are critical to fulfilling our mission to educate the Jewish community and promote civic participation, which is what the JCRC is all about. The JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the Greater Washington's area's Jewish community. And we represent more than 100 organizations and synagogues and schools throughout the entire region, from Fairfax to Fredericksburg, I like to say. And we advocate for the needs and values of the Jewish community, but also focus on the well-being of everyone in our region, including the most vulnerable. The JCRC is focused on combating anti-Semitism and supporting the state of Israel, and we are strongly committed to cultivating a society based on freedom, equity, and justice, and pluralism. Now let me introduce again our guest, who is running for Maryland Comptroller, Brooke Lierman. And I've got to tell you that I have been a political observer for 25 years, having run campaigns in my previous life and having gone ahead of them. And I've got to tell you that from a purely professional level, I have never seen a candidate out there as much as Brooke. It is just an extraordinary ability of making herself accessible to people and answering questions. I think it's just from a professional point of view, I think it's an extraordinary campaign she's run. Brooke is a civil rights and disabilities attorney and a state delegate representing District 46 in Baltimore City, but she did grow up in Montgomery County. Okay, just remember that, everybody. She served for 5 years as a member of the Appropriations Committee before assuming a leadership role on the Environment and Transportation Committee in 2019. Brooke also serves as the housing chair for the Joint Committee on Pensions, sits on the Joint Committee on Ending Homelessness, and founded and formally co-chaired the Maryland Transit Caucus. Brooke has advocated for critical legislation that invests in public transit, funds reading initiatives for public students, closes loopholes in family-based leave laws, which was a very important development for many of us, prevents income discrimination in housing, and promotes evidence-based guns violence interruption programs. She also played a pivotal role in the first in the nation styrofoam ban. Brooke, it's nice to have you with us. First question, and which I guess you could do, why are you running for controller? And you know what? A lot of people would probably like to know, what is the controller?
That is the number one question I get on the campaign trail. Well, good morning, everybody. Ron, great to see you. I will note that when we had lunch at the Parkway Diner, the pickle bar was not yet open. And so I need to go back because the pickle bar has since—
You got a free lunch.
Yes. So it's great to see everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on a Monday morning to hear about the comptroller's race. I know it's probably not top of mind for everybody. And thank you, Councilmember Hooker, for joining as well. It's great to be here with all of you. So as Ron said, I am Brooke Lierman. I am a civil rights and disability rights attorney. I'm a public school mom. I'm a Walt Whitman graduate. I'm a leader in the House of Delegates, where I've served for 2 terms representing South and Southeast Baltimore City. And I'm really thrilled to be running to be your next state comptroller. You know, I think it's really essential to always start with what on earth does a comptroller do, because it really helps frame the conversation and talk a little bit about, you know, making sure that we're empowering all of you to have information to share with friends and colleagues as well. So the 3 things that I like to always remind people, the role of the comptroller, and it is bigger than this, but these are the top 3, is number 1, the comptroller is one of only 3 independently elected statewide offices. So we have the governor, the attorney general, and the comptroller. And the comptroller really serves as like the elected CFO of the state of Maryland. And as from my role on the Appropriations Committee, I have a keen familiarity with, you know, our $50+ billion budget. I serve as joint chair of the pension committee, so I've helped oversee our pension system. And I will say, as the elected CFO, you know, we really need somebody who is going to be prepared to tackle the economic challenges of the day. And, you know, here in Maryland, that's really working with communities and businesses to overcome the racial wealth divide in the state. At this point, it's helping working families overcome the challenge of inflation, right? It's preparing us for climate change and the economic impact of climate change. So I'm looking forward to being able to step in as the elected CFO and work on many of this while retaining our AAA bond rating, of course. Number 2, the comptroller sits on a number of very important state boards. So 2 I always highlight are the State Retirement and Pension System and the Board of Public Works. These are the boards that really hold the power of the purse in Maryland. Our tax dollars all go through these boards. On the state retirement and pension system, as I mentioned, I chair the Joint Committee on Pensions right now, and I've been on that committee for 8 years. This is a $70 billion system that serves the needs of 415,000 state retirees. And the system is doing well right now. Our pension system, our pension fund is strong. I have been proud to lead the effort to reduce the amount of fees that we're paying to private equity, to investment management firms, outside firms, by bringing some investment in-house. I led the effort this year to divest from Russia because after Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw the precipitous decline of the value of those assets, and it was really essential that we get out quickly. And also to make sure that we're preparing for the challenge of climate change by really understanding that climate risk is investment risk. And then there's the Board of Public Works. So the Board of Public Works is the most important board in the state of Maryland. It is a 3-person body: the governor, the treasurer, and the comptroller, through which all major contracts and spending decisions must go. So this is a unique body in American state government. No other state has a Board of Public Works. And it is responsible for, saying yes to building, approving funds for more schools, or saying yes to buying new electric buses to put on the road, or on water issues, building new water infrastructure, or laying broadband for contracts that counties bring forward. So a huge variety of issues. And I've worked closely with the Board of Public Works as a member of the Appropriations Committee and more to help open up the process and bring more transparency. And I'm excited to be really the people's advocate on the Board of Public Works, because that's the role of the comptroller. The governor really works with the agencies. The treasurer is appointed by the General Assembly. And so the comptroller is supposed to be the people's independent voice, making sure that we secure best value for our dollars each and every time. And then the third role of the state comptroller, sorry to remind you on a Monday morning, I'm running to be your next tax collector or your tax refunder in a good year. But there too, there's so much that we can do to really streamline the tax administration system. I've worked with and talked with a number of tax attorneys and CPAs all around the state on ways that we can make it easier to pay taxes, lower the cost of compliance for businesses, make it easier to start a small business, as well as reducing the demand on working families and teachers and older adults to claim tax credits that are owed to them. I'll give you one quick example. Last year, the General Assembly passed the largest expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit in America. This is real money for working families to, repair their car to get to work, or help make sure their kids can go to summer camp because they have those few extra dollars. But over a quarter of families in Maryland who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit do not claim it. So they are leaving money on the table that could dramatically.
How many, Brooke, don't claim it, did you say?
Over a quarter. So one of the highest percentages in the country. And we know that that's real money for those families. And so we want to make sure that the comptroller's office is being very proactive and reaching out to those families and make it easier to claim those credits. So I'd say at the end of the day, the comptroller's office is really the first office in our state government that sees the numbers that tell the story of how families and communities and businesses are doing. And I am somebody who's going to be focused on making sure that those numbers look good for all of us. So I'm happy to be here today and excited. We have 36 days to go until Election Day.
But who's counting?
But who's counting?
Brooke, I want to ask you a question and then start off. First of all, thank you really for being here. Why is it, other than perhaps it's in the charter, why does the state of Maryland have a Board of Public Works? I mean, I understand that it's there, it serves a role as protecting our AAA bond rating. I understand that it has a role, but how does the presence, just structurally, because a lot of people don't understand that all contracts, even after they've been approved by the state legislator, still have to go through the Board of Public Works for approval. So how does that impact the balance of power between the state legislator and the Board of Public Works? And you're a delegate, so you've had to pass legislation, and then it has to go before the Board of Public Works. So can you explain a little bit that dynamic, like why we have this Board of Public Works and its influence, and why do we have it? And by the way, I would like to add one thing. Montgomery County was the first, and I'm glad JCRC played a role. We were the first county, the first local government in the United States to have a local earned income tax credit that was passed under Doug Duncan. And so the second question comes in is there a possibility of expanding local EITCs that could help the working poor even take advantage? The first question is about
history of the Board of Public Works.
Go, please.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it's very interesting, but I'm not, I don't try to give history lessons all the time. So in the 1800s, there was really rampant fraud in Maryland at the state level. Yes, and so real misuse of taxpayer dollars, and it was a huge problem, the expenditures, the contracts, procurement generally. And so we, as voters, Marylanders, approved a constitutional amendment to create a Board of Public Works. This is the third iteration of what it looks like, and it was 1864 when the present 3-member Board of Public Works was approved, and it was the Constitution, and then the Constitution of 1867 continued the provisions for it, and it's been in existence ever since. And the idea was that just to add additional accountability and transparency, a check on the governor's powers, because in every other state, the governor is the executive who signs off on expenditures by its agencies. So the legislative branch passes, the budget working with the governor, but then at the end of the day, the agencies, whether it's Maryland Department of Transportation to, build, to buy buses or build highways, or whether it's, local school boards who are making decisions about how they're going to spend money on schools and working with the State Department of Education, or whether it's DNR spending money on our state parks, all of those contracts in other states would ultimately end up with a governor. Here, they end up with the Board of Public Works. And I will say for 130 years, there was very, very little transparency about the Board of Public Works and the decisions that they were going to make. My first year in office, we passed legislation requiring the Board of Public Works to publish their agenda at least 10 days prior to their meeting, so that all of the members of the public could see what the Board of Public Works would be voting on, and to provide more transparency about the expenditures of the state. We also required them to start live streaming their meetings. So you can go watch the Board of Public Works. They're on Wednesday mornings. You can watch their meetings online to see them deliberate, to see them make decisions. And then their agenda, and they have their own website now as well, where you can go find their agenda. You can find what was approved. You can find details on everything. So we've tried to really open up the Board of Public Works over the past decade to bring more transparency and accountability for the board itself. And the comptroller's role was really created to be a check. And the treasurer is supposed to be the voice of the General Assembly. The governor is there speaking for the agencies. So the comptroller is really there to be the check and the people's advocate on the board regarding expenditures. So that's a little bit about the history of the Board of Public Works. And the other question about local EITCs, certainly, I think if local governments are able to do that kind of work, it's an essential component of, making dollars work and making families be able to afford what they need. So certainly I'm supportive of always, of expanding the earned income tax credit. I think the big concern is the more tax credits and the more complicated we make the tax system, whether it's through local or state or federal, the harder it is for families to actually claim what we're trying to give them. And so we have to always be mindful of making sure that we're creating an easier system to use, or creating processes that are easier as well. So that's something that as a tax administrator, I will be very excited to work on that effort.
So folks, please start entering your questions in the inbox at this point. Brooke, I have a question for you. Right now, how many employees and does the controller have? Tell us a little, I'm telling you, it's one of the unique things. It's interesting. As I go around, I meet with a lot of the candidates running for governor, attorney general, always at the Silver Diner. I have to plug the Silver Diner and the omelets. But the question is why is it, do you think, that this position, which has so much power in the state of Maryland, gets so overlooked? In other words, like, people are always looking, they figure, oh, the attorney general puts people in jail, which is not exactly 100% true. And the governor runs the state. Why is it, do you think, the control? I mean, I know the control, can you give us a little bit information about the impact of the controller on people's daily lives, the amount of employees it has, the office it has? I mean, it's quite a big operation from what I understand.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's really a sprawling agency. It has 1,082 positions in it. So it's quite a large agency, and it does much more than the three big broad things that I mentioned. In addition, I'll say, there's the Board of Public Works, the State Retirement and Pension Board. There's also the Bureau of Revenue Estimates. And the Bureau of Revenue Estimates is in charge of all forecasting for the state of Maryland. So we know how much money we have to spend when we pass a budget as a General Assembly. So the BRE is really essential. I've worked extensively actually with the BRE to try to open it up and to provide more transparency and accountability around our budget forecasting, which makes a big difference in the amount of dollars we have to spend, whether it's on, bond bills for local projects or money that's for for local governments. So the comptroller and the BRE help local governments understand what their budgets can be too. And if we get it wrong, if the BRE gets it wrong, then it means local governments are leaving money on the table or are overspending and then have to cut, which is really challenging for local agencies. So the BRE is a really essential agency as well, which is in the comptroller's office. The comptroller also is in charge of all central payroll. It has a huge IT section. It oversees all the registers of wills all around the states and works with all of the registers, which is something that I'm an attorney. I've done a lot of work on housing. I'm really interested in making sure, in tax and estates, that we're working with our registers to support them and to make it easier for folks to access, their ability to do trust and estates and to work with our registers. So it is a huge office. It's really interesting. The final thing that I'll say about the comptroller's office that I think has a lot of potential is that the comptroller has 12 field offices all around the state of Maryland. And those field offices, I like to say, they're sort of like the MVA, but no lines. So, those are places where we can really be doing outreach into individual communities. So there's a Wheaton field office. Well, making sure that the comptroller's office in Wheaton is really reaching out to Main Street organizations, to synagogues, to faith-based groups, to sororities, to fraternities, to high schools, bringing ideas on financial literacy, bringing resources on how to do tax prep, how to do, tax preparation services, working with them on how to start a small business, like really getting to know the community, I think is really essential. So I want to make sure that those comptrollers' offices, those local offices, are very present and proactive in reaching out to their districts, because that's how I am as a delegate. I've had it's been an honor representing District 46, and my constituents have been incredibly supportive of me because I show up for them, right? They know how to reach me. I'm very present in my communities and able to bring in resources and think big about how we can overcome challenges. So I'm excited to bring that to the comptroller's office.
Well, Wendy, who had her hand up, said, thank you for providing this means to hear from the candidate. Thank you very much for providing this means to hear from the candidates in a meaningful way. Miriam, do you have a question? Miriam Galston, a new member of the board and a former member of the JCRC's executive committee.
Yes, so thank you, both Ron and Brooke. I don't know if you have anything you can do about this. I read my neighborhood listserv pretty frequently and have been surprised and appalled and frightened by the level of car thefts and break-ins. And this is Montgomery County. I have no idea about the rest of Maryland, but I'm assuming if it's going on here, it's probably going on elsewhere. Is there anything that you as comptroller would be able to do to help alleviate that situation? I don't know if it's funding for police or I don't understand the system. I just understand that this is fairly recent and is so extreme that it's affected, lots and lots of people, even in these neighborhoods. And so that's my question.
Sure, thanks for that question. And certainly, first and foremost, it's essential that government work with communities to create safe and stable neighborhoods, right, in every corner of the state. I'll say as comptroller, I won't be overseeing public safety efforts. Public safety is generally local, but one of the things that I'm looking forward to working on is really to help tackle some of the long-term challenges that perhaps lead families and lead individuals to choosing, to act out, in that way and to commit crimes, right? So when you think about crime, how I think about it is sort of like long-term challenges, right? Investing in schools, investing in family, building more prosperity, tackling the wealth divides in the state, and helping create and grow generational wealth, especially in neighborhoods that have been long neglected, and in communities. That's sort of long-term. Short-term, I will say there's really essential programs that work to help stem gun violence. There's programs like Safe Streets. There's a program called ROCA. There's other community-based violence intervention programs that I actually passed the first state legislation to create a fund to invest in this, what we call, it's the Maryland VIP program, the Maryland Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. It's a model that is now being used around the state to help fund local violence prevention programming. And really amazingly, President Biden is now fully committed to funding those types of violence prevention efforts because they're evidence-based. They actually prevent violence. So that's sort of short-term prevention. And then, of course, there's responding to violence, which is, working with our police, working with mental health providers, and ensuring that we have the teams that we need and they have the resources that they need. So I think those are the three stages of creating a robust public safety system. And probably in the prevention stage as well, I should have mentioned mental health services and trauma-informed care. So I think the comptroller's office, I'm looking forward to working with our local governments, on resources, making sure we have the resources, but also on tackling some of those longer term challenges to help, build up generational wealth, to tackle the racial wealth divide, to make sure that to make sure that it's not a rational decision to choose to carjack, right? I mean, in some neighborhoods, in some places around the state, that's what you need to, that's how people feel like they're backed into a corner and they choose that. We don't want that as an option. If they do that, there need to be consequences, of course. But I want to focus on some of the economic issues and the disparities. That's the role of the comptroller's office, to help tackle those. And then I will also say to make sure that we're fully funding those community-based violence prevention efforts, right? That's been a real focus of mine over the years. In addition to saving lives, it also saves money. Crime costs the state and our local communities a huge amount of resources. And so we want to be preventing crime for multiple reasons. So I'm committed to being a good partner on making sure that we use evidence-based methods to stop crime.
Thank you.
Belle Davis, I see you have your hand up or your icon up or your.
I have a quick comment for Miriam and then a question for Brooke. I suspect that one of the reasons that we in Montgomery County are the targets of so many car break-ins and carjackings and burglaries is because we're wealthier than DC and PG and people who are looking for an opportunity to improve their financial situation are tempted to operate in Montgomery County that way, as opposed to Southeast DC, where the resources are not as abundant. My question for Brooke is how generously are the local offices, the 12 local offices funded and staffed?
Great question. So there is more to do on the local offices. I think one of the first things I would do, of course, is to, when we get, if I win, is to review the entire budget and look at where we're spending our resources and how we can modify to make sure that we are more generously supporting our local offices. So I can't give you numbers off the top of my head. I don't have the budget right in front of me of the entire office. But certainly, I think there needs to be a little bit of a recalibration to rethink about the need for support in those offices. I think the first thing that any new administrator should do is pull together their team, right? So I would be pulling together the folks in the comptroller's office. I'm really excited to have the support of AFSCME in this election, in this campaign, our state workers, because I've worked with them for years. So pull together the team at the comptroller's office and really start to get to know what are the challenges they're facing. How can the central office help those local offices make sure they have the resources and the staff and the team to reach out to other people, to reach out to communities that they serve? And, what are their ideas for serving people better, right? How can we empower them to do a better and bigger job? And to really be bold in thinking about how we can better serve the people of Maryland. So pulling together people to understand that is certainly one of the first things that we'll do.
Okay, a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Are they funded? Is there one person in each office?
No, there's more
20
than
people in each office?
It depends on the office is the answer. Every office is staffed slightly differently, is my understanding. So some of the offices have multiple people, some of the offices might have 2 people. So it really depends on the office at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
my pleasure.
Carol Ann Heck asks, is the Controller's Office responsible for collecting Maryland taxes? Is it the equivalent to the IRS?
Yes, it is. That is the third thing I mentioned. It is the Comptroller's Office is the tax collector of the state, also the tax refunder of the state.
I prefer that, by the way.
Yes. Yes, so it is indeed. And it works with all of our local governments to collect local taxes and then remit them to our local governments as well, which is an essential partnership that I look forward to strengthening. I've known Rich Madaleno, of course, in County Executive Elrich's office for many years, and he and I have had several conversations about, how we can strengthen the work that the Comptroller's Office does with our local governments to make sure our local governments are getting correct forecasts, to make sure that they're getting the dollars that they're owed in a timely way so that they can use those monies. I mean, this is all very sort of back end things that we all want to take for granted are happening, but that we need to make sure do happen, because when things go awry, it's really bad. And so things that we have to make sure we stay on top of and strengthen processes for.
Brooke, let me ask you a question. So every, one of the things that JCRC does, besides, I'm not including Virginia, DC now, but in Maryland, is that we lobby for, our policy and the financial interests of the Jewish community and our agencies on the state and local level. And one of the things that's always very interesting is whenever I approach the county executive, whether it was Duncan or Leggett or now Mark Elrich, is that they would always tell me around like December, well, I don't know how much money we're going to have because we haven't got our forecast yet. So explain to me how so number one, local, correct me if I'm wrong, local governments like Montgomery County, which is what most of us are here, particularly have one person from Howard County, are you guys provide, do you guys provide the governor and the local government as to where the budget is at every point in the session, like where we are throughout the year spending, whether we're heading bad, well, where tax collections are that provide the sort of the roadmap, so that when they put their budget together, they can figure out how much on the municipal level they're going to get, and explain that sort of a little bit to us?
Yes, so the Board of Revenue, so there's a Bureau of Revenue Estimates, and overseeing that bureau, which is the staff, there's a Board of Revenue Estimates, the BRE. And the BRE is the comptroller, the treasurer, the Secretary of Budget and Management, and they all oversee this bureau, and they're responsible for The Bureau itself and the staff are responsible for studying and analyzing all sources of revenue to operate state government, and to anticipate what that revenue will look like and how much we and our local governments have to spend. So they meet every year in March, September, and December. The Bureau submits to the board a statement of the estimated state revenues from all sources. So whether it's state income taxes or sales taxes, property taxes, or more. And the board then presents that works with local governments, works with the state government to say, here's the money that we have to spend moving forward. And then often you'll see there are adjustments because they sometimes get things wrong. And so then you have to look back and see there are adjustments made on how much there is to spend versus not. So the BRE is a little black box, a little bit of a black box right now. And so I led the effort, actually working very closely with Delegate Mark Corman and Delegate Eric Lutke last year to pass legislation to open up the BRE process and to bring a little sunshine to it all, like we did with the Board of Public Works many years ago. So now we will, the Board of Revenue Estimates will have its own website, its own webpage where people can go read forecasts, understand where the analysis is coming from. It will create also itemized lists for different funds. So within state government, there's many different funds. For instance, the Transportation Trust Fund, which is a locked box fund of money that comes in through gas taxes, corporate income taxes, and other to fund our transportation system, right? Then there's also other funds like the Blueprint Fund. I worked extensively on the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is strengthening legislation we passed to strengthen our public school systems. It's funded through something called the Blueprint Fund. But so in order to make sure we have enough money to implement that, we need to keep an eye on the Blueprint Fund. So all of that data will go on the new BRE website to provide additional information to you and to me and everybody interested in it.
Most people didn't. And they
Whoever,
kept it under wraps. They've known since March 15th. But
There you go.
thank you. Go ahead, Brooke. I apologize.
Nope, so the BRE is a really essential agency and component of the comptroller system. So I'm looking forward to that.
So we have 3 quick questions, and after that we'll call it a day unless anybody has, because I know you're hitting the campaign trail this morning. What specific ideas at the state level are you considering for tackling economic disparities?
Really important question. So if you think through the racial wealth gap that exists in this country, Maryland is definitely not immune from it. And first and foremost, I would say we need to create an equity officer in the office of the comptroller. So that officer would ensure that policies and practices take the wealth gap into account and are intentionally focused on reducing that gap, whether it's on procurement or tax collection, tax guidance, preparation services, making sure they're equitable for all Marylanders. And it's also advising on issues related to, the many government bodies that the comptroller serves on, including the Board of Public Works, the State Retirement and Pension Board, and more. Within that, then I'd say there's 3 broad categories. There's ways that the comptroller's office and that I would focus on closing the racial wealth gap in the state. One is on promoting homeownership and personal property. Because rates of homeownership are the most significant factor driving the racial wealth gap in Maryland. So just over 40% of Black households are homeowners, whereas nearly 3/4 of white households own their home nationally. So making sure that we're monitoring bank small lending, that we're increasing and expanding tax credits like the historic revitalization tax credit and the new and funding the new appraisal gap program that I worked with Senator Antonio Hayes to create, working with our register of wills to make sure that our seniors who have homes are passing them on and they're not being lost to tax sale, which is something that has become a huge problem in Baltimore City and other jurisdictions around the state, and supporting housing counseling. So there are a number of things like housing counseling is one aspect of financial literacy. I'd like the comptroller's office to really play a leading role in promoting that. Number 2 is really promoting assets and savings. So within that, there's a number of things, whether it's maintaining that expanded earned income tax credit and making sure that families are claiming it, looking at enhanced tax preparation, licensing, and financial literacy assistance, expanding college and education access and affordability. So the Comptroller's Office oversees the Maryland 529 plan. So I want to make sure that the 529 is being used in there's equitable access and participation for those 529 savings plans, right? And then the third category is really on promoting business ownership, because when you own your business, that can be a way to really grow generational wealth. So thinking through how our investor tax credits work, looking at, we created a couple of years ago a loan loss guarantee program for small businesses, because we know that Black-owned businesses are turned down for loans at twice the rate of white-owned businesses. So as comptroller, I want to make sure that we're talking with the banks, make sure that isn't happening, and that we're thinking through how to get Black-owned businesses loans, low interest loans, so that they can grow and thrive. Looking at cannabis legalization and making sure that there's equity in how that is laid out as well. So that's a lot, but those are just, a few of the things that I think the Comptroller's Office can be leading on.
So DJ Jane Collins asked, it is my understanding that funds dedicated to certain projects can be withheld by the governor. For example, she's citing the money withheld by the governor to provide abortion services, as you can see there, for nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, and OBGYNs. Is there a role for the comptroller in helping to deal with the situation?
So it's a really important question, and it's actually, so that will change a little bit in the coming years. So right now we have one of the strongest governors in the country in terms of our budgeting process. So how our budget currently is set in Maryland is that the governor writes the budget and then sends it. There's a capital budget and operating budget, sends those two budgets to the General Assembly. So I was on the Appropriations Committee, so I was a part of this process. Then the Appropriations Committee and the General Assembly have to approve the capital budget and the operating budget. I'm going to set aside the capital budget right now and just talk about the operating budget, which is like how we would fund training for nurse practitioners and midwives to do abortion care access. So the operating budget, the General Assembly cannot add money to the next fiscal year's operating budget right now. It can only cut and then fence that money off and say that it can only be spent for one purpose. So I'll give you an example. Say the governor in his budget put, I want to fund, line item X within the Department of Health at $10 million. Well, and the General Assembly said, line item X, it doesn't need $10 million. It only needs $5 million. Well, we can cut $5 million from it. And we can say, we're going to take that $5 million and put it into a new training program to train our RNs, our nurse practitioners, and our midwives on abortion care, right? So we've set up this program now, and we're fencing off that $5 million for that training. The governor then, we pass the budget, it's done. The governor then says, okay, you fence that money off. I don't need to spend it. Like I can't spend it on anything else, but I don't have to spend it. Right now, the governor can do that because we didn't actually fund that. We couldn't actually add money to that training program because we can't add money in the governor's budget. We can only fence it off, but he can't spend it on anything else either. So that $5 million will just sit there for the next year. It will not be spent on anything else. It will just sit in a bank account, go unused, and go not helping people, which is really unfortunate. So last year, the voters of Maryland approved question 1, constitutional amendment that changes how our budget works, so that now when the governor will send in his budget and the General Assembly can say, oh, we're going to cut $5 million from line item X, and we are going to add that $5 million over to line item Y. And then it's done. And we pass the budget, and that program has that money. He cannot say, you don't get that money, program Y. So we have now changed the budget process in Maryland moving forward, but it doesn't hold for this year. So we did that when we passed the constitutional amendment. The comptroller's role in that is small. The comptroller doesn't come in until that $5 million for abortion care funding that we're talking about, until the Maryland Department of Health says, we're going to contract with, with Planned Parenthood and Kaiser Permanente, and they're going to do training programs. Then those contracts come to the Board of Public Works, and the comptroller says, yes, this is a good deal for Maryland, or no, this is not a good deal for Maryland, and helps sign off on how that money is spent. So I see some nods. So hopefully that was helpful in understanding some of the intricacies of the budgeting process. But I will say the comptroller has a statewide voice though. And so, when money's being withheld or the governor isn't doing something that the comptroller wants to see, I'll be speaking up about that, right? It's essential that we are spending our dollars to help make sure that we're not waiving minority business enterprise requirements. That's something I should have mentioned when we were talking about the racial wealth divide, like ensuring that we're spending state dollars on Black-owned businesses. Right now, there are many waivers that happen so that, some our businesses are we're not meeting our MBE goals, as it's called. I'm, looking forward to being a voice to make sure that we're supporting our women-owned businesses, our Black-owned businesses, immigrant-owned businesses to help tackle that divide. And using the statewide voice to make sure that we're thinking through how we use our money is essential. And the comptroller has an important role there.
Brooke, so when, if let's say that this 3.5 million that was allocated to train these practitioners to perform abortion, which is, I didn't realize that in 2/3 of Maryland's counties, there are no abortion service providers. I was unaware of that because I live in Montgomery County. Will the ability to, are you saying the governor will no longer have that ability to do that in the next fiscal budget, so that as of July 2023, if the same money is allocated again in the same way, that let's say that we have a Republican governor who believes in the same position that Governor Hogan is, that governor would be unable to do that?
Yes, so that money will be available for sure, unless for some reason the General Assembly cuts the whole program on July 1, 2023.
Okay, before I get to the next question, I want to ask you a question and I think I know the answer, but I'm wondering right now, in the Jewish community, if you look at polls in the Jewish community outside of immigration, basic security for Israel, it's hard to get a more a higher degree of support than for maintaining the challenges, for maintaining the Roe v. Wade standards that were put in place by the court. One of the things that we anticipate is that, obviously, like most people, that it will be struck down, possibly even today or tomorrow. In the next few days, we expect the decision to come, and already people are beginning to use the term abortion tourism, where we know, for example, that more people are taking flights from Dallas on Southwest and coming to Baltimore because of the 6-week restriction in Texas. And I'm wondering, is there any, even though the governor goes ahead and sets the budget, and will change, is there a role for the comptroller to help influence the priorities of the budget, especially in this one area? Because I have a feeling, because I was reading that for 9 million women, if Roe v. Wade goes down, Chicago is going to be the closest place for them to get reproductive choice services. And it scares me that there's going to be an island, vast territories in the United States where women are going to have to travel. There's a Washington Post article that talked about how women had to drive, like literally hundreds of miles round trip and then come back again. And I'm wondering, if any, does the comptroller's office have any ability to help shape that agenda? Even though I know the budget process, I've been lobbying on it for 25 years. I'm wondering, is there any influence, any ability that you can do to make sure? Because I think that that more women, more than ever, are going to be coming mostly from the western part of our country to Maryland for these reproductive services.
Thanks for that question. As a former NARAL board member and Planned Parenthood intern, I am very supportive of this. And for those of you who are interested, I gave a floor speech in support of our abortion healthcare access bill this past session. On my Facebook page, you can find it. So It's a really important question. And the answer is yes. I mean, I will certainly be a leader in speaking out for increasing access and making sure that women have access to reproductive care in Maryland. I think we need to realize that people are going to need to come here. Women are going to need to, abortion is not going to end if Roe v. Wade is overturned. The concern is that safe abortions will end. And so we need to make sure that we're providing alternatives for women and safe abortion care access. I think both the governor, the comptroller, and the attorney general, we will all play a role in ensuring that healthcare is available. The governor, through, of course, the budget and the Department of Health, supporting our local reproductive care health agencies around and our nonprofits around the state, increasing access. The attorney general, there will be questions about, if Texas or some other state wants to try to get medical records of women who sought abortions, right? The attorney general will, I am sure, be in court trying to protect women who have come to seek healthcare services in Maryland and then gone back to their home states to live, right? So there will be court fights about that. And the comptroller's office, I would be there, as a woman, speaking out at a statewide level, both on the importance of ensuring that funding is available and making sure that we're looking through our revenue estimates and understanding where funds are available. And frankly, also making both the personal case as a woman, I will be making that personal case. It's important to have women statewide leaders. We have none right now. We have never had a woman comptroller. We've never had a woman elected to statewide state office in her own right in Maryland. So essential to having a woman's voice there, but also to be making the economic case, right? It's essential that women have authority over their reproductive futures for both personal autonomy and also for their economic futures. So there are huge, I think there's a lot that we will all work in tandem to do to make sure that women from around the country, some will go to Chicago. I can foresee, southeastern states, if they start banning it, whether you're Florida or Georgia or South Carolina, Maryland we're going to be the border state, right? We're going to be the state that women from those areas can access, and we need to be ready for them.
Would money to help those women who are poor, who couldn't afford, come out of Maryland's budget? Or do you think it would be likely that there would have to be private nonprofits established to help go ahead and fund those costs?
I think it will be likely that it would be private nonprofits for the most part, unless they, if they have private insurance and their private insurance covers it. In Maryland, we've just expanded to require that all insurance cover abortion care, and Medicaid covers abortion care in Maryland, but most states don't have that expanded coverage option. I should also add that I think local leaders like, Councilman Hucker and our local leaders working in their individual jurisdictions will be important as well in supporting that effort.
So as far as I can see, thank you, Brooke. That was an important thing. I think the Roe v. Wade decision is on everyone's mind. And sometimes we forget how elected officials, we tend to box elected officials into what we think is their areas of responsibilities. We don't understand the widespread, the variety of responsibilities and impacts that they have. And it just shows, even as controller, how you can have, and as a female elected leader, how you can go ahead and have an outsized influence on this question, on these issues. Final question, unless somebody wants to put one in the box. Wendy says, thanks for explaining the structural background to the office and how you would want to improve its operation. Would you please share your spending priorities, including incentive for such issues as climate change and environment, gun violence, and other priorities, to the extent that it's relevant to your position? So to the job, climate and environmental issues, gun violence, your ability to influence, and your priorities.
Sure, absolutely. Again, the General Assembly and the governor set our budget. I would certainly be a very vocal advocate for funding, making sure that there's funding in place for some of the climate legislation that we all passed in the past few years, ensuring that when we're providing funding, that we're incentivizing buildings to go electric, that we're thinking through climate change impact. So my voice on climate, I think, will come in where we think through first place is when we're thinking through our budgeting, are we making sure that we're keeping climate change and its impact on our economy and on our local governments and local communities in mind? So what does that mean? It means making sure that when we're thinking through building a new school, that school is not sited in a floodplain, right? That when we're thinking through building a new school, that we're thinking through solar panels on top and a net zero school, and that our budget reflects that. When we're looking at energy sources, ensuring that we're thinking through prioritizing solar and offshore wind, which I'm a huge supporter of. So making sure that those decisions are top of mind is essential. Then there's the back end, right? On the Board of Public Works end, making sure that when we do approve dollars and we do approve contracts, that nothing fell between the cracks, that school is going to have solar panels, right? That we're really thinking through how to use the money that's coming into the state, especially the federal infrastructure dollars, in a way that builds a more climate resilient state overall, right? I think in the next 4 years, because of this money that's coming in, we can change Maryland for the better for 40 years to come. And a huge piece of that is building climate resilient neighborhoods, communities, and infrastructure, whether it's water infrastructure, power infrastructure, to power our local governments, to power our state governments. The Comptroller's office can be a key advisor and play a helpful role to our local governments as well as state government agencies to move to solar. So I'll say just recently, Howard County struck a deal where they are working with a company. They put solar panels all over Howard County, and those solar panels are now powering Howard County state government for the next 25 years, and they are guaranteed a rate that is at or below their traditional rate from standard offer service. So those kinds of deals are really models that the Comptroller's office can help our local governments enact and work with our state agencies as well. Finally, I'll say on climate, we need to get a better handle over the effect that climate change is going to have in our communities. We need to have what I would call a climate change audit to really understand, as rising waters come, as storms change their patterns and intensify, where are the vulnerable communities? What money do we need to set aside to make sure that we are restoring and saving and building up those communities, right? Often those are communities of color who have not had the infrastructure investment that they need, whether it's they are seas of cement, and so there's no place for stormwater runoff to go. We need more trees and more green space to soak up some of that water and to decrease the urban heat island effect. Whether it's that a community rec center was built in a floodplain, and now every time that there's a big storm, it floods and kids can't use it, right? We need to have a climate change audit to understand what it will cost the state and our local governments to make sure that we're building more climate resilient structures. And that's something that I will be prioritizing and working on, as I like to say, the climate comptroller moving forward. So I'm really proud to have the endorsement of the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club, who recognize that I've been a partner with them for the past 8 years and have big ideas on how the Comptroller's office can prepare us to meet the challenge of climate change moving forward. I want to close because I don't want to keep everybody for a long time, but I also want to say that I have very detailed policies and ideas on my website at brookelierman.com. So I hope you'll visit my website and check it out. You can just go to priorities. There's even a little cartoon. If you go to the brookelierman.com and go to priorities and go to what is a comptroller anyway, there's a little cartoon about what on earth a comptroller does that I encourage you to share with friends and family and on social media, as well as other resources. So thank you, Ron, so much for hosting us today. Thank you all of us for joining. Thank you all of you for joining on a Monday morning to learn about the Comptroller's office, and truly hope I can earn your support, and really hope that you will make sure that you go tell many of your friends and family and neighbors, because they're just, people, there are a lot of races this year. This is an essential opportunity to really be bold and do better in Maryland. And so I hope that you'll help us spread the word. Thank you.